not
Okay,
anime
good.
sharp, but very sharp. Okay. All right. I want to welcome Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife to the virtual couch. Welcome, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No, I really am grateful that you're willing to take the time. And I was going to jump right out of the gate. This is, I know that I want your background. I want to get into a very solid interview, but I just had a client, and I've been dropping your name for a little while. I'm not going to lie. If you would have had to cancel today, I would have, been racked with guilt and shame. But the last client that left, they just said, do you think that when people want to talk to her, because you specialize a lot in sexuality and
Yes.
issues around sexuality, do you typically get hey, so my friend wanted me to ask you? I mean, is that the way most conversations start with you?
That's a good question. Sometimes at parties, that's how it goes,
Yeah. We don't have this
My
problem.
friend is having this issue, and what do you think about that?
Right.
Yeah,
Now,
so,
do you know right away that it is their issue?
sometimes, but not always. Sometimes it is a friend, sometimes some friend is going through something, but, sometimes you wonder if they're just, trying to cover that they
Yes.
have the question. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I so want to just launch into my next question, but we need your background first because it will make more sense to the question I want to ask. So,
Sure.
Jennifer, talk a little bit about your background.
So I have a PhD in counseling psychology, and I studied at BYU, Brigham Young University. I did my undergrad in psychology and women's studies. And then as a grad student, I was asked to teach an undergrad course on human sexuality. And that was at the same time that I was trying to figure out a dissertation topic. And, if I could spend a lot of time talking about how I came to my topic, but
Yeah.
I decided to write my dissertation on Mormon women and sexuality, and looking at Mormon women's sense of agency in their lives, both premaritally and within marriage. And so that was the focus of my research.
Okay. You had a funny story about the teaching the classes too. I heard on one of the podcasts. What was that?
Yeah. So I was not yet married, and I was asked to teach two courses. One was human sexuality, and the other was drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
And here I was, a Mormon who had no experience with either.
And which one? So yeah, you chose.
I ended up saying no to the drugs and alcohol one and just did the sexuality one. But
Okay.
so it opened up lots of questions. Look, I was teaching Catholic students because it was a Jesuit college.
Okay.
Colleges. So it was helping me sort of look at sexuality through the lens of Catholicism, and then thinking about Mormonism as well as feminism, which I had studied a lot of. And so that led me to my topic, which was a fascinating dissertation. Yeah.
I bet. Well, and I am kind of maybe going to go a little bit out of order because I have to tell you, as I was dropping your name, so I had a woman who was sending me an email about one of the podcasts that she heard me on, and it was in particular about why is it so difficult to get men into counseling, which I'm sure we could talk about, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but she then said, I told her that you were coming on the podcast, again, dropping the name all I could, and I actually wrote this. This was her exact quote. She said, I love, and that's all in caps. So she was screaming this, Jennifer. Her dissertation was fascinating. So I'm talking about your dissertation, and she has a great question I want to get to in a little bit. But so I didn't realize. So you had worked with Catholics. You've worked as well as with Mormon, because you're primarily focused with LDS women now. Is that?
Yes, definitely. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then my question, and I don't want you to think that everything I'm going to say is going to be a joke today, but I mean, I do find that I do a lot of couples therapy, and I find that, and I work with a pretty heavy LDS population as well. And kind of my joke is that with most couples, I see the sexual piece comes in usually in session 1. And the LDS couples, usually it's in session 4 or 5, and it's they're walking out the door, and it's, by the way, have you ever heard of, I mean, do you find that to be the case, or when people know that's what you specialize in, do they come in ready?
I mean, one thing I would say is that many times it is men. I would say probably 50% of the time it's men reaching out for therapy to me, for couples therapy around sexual issues.
Okay.
So, men do initiate counseling, but often sex is what gets them through the door.
I love that, because that does make more sense. I mean, I'm usually getting, women will initiate with me because I'm a male therapist. And so the guy will only go to a man therapist if I think that if she's saying, you don't communicate. So I've never thought of that though. So for you have the specialty of, working with sex issues around sexuality.
Yes.
So okay, we can go in a whole direction. So when men then come in, is it almost like, hey, tell her she needs to have more, more sex with me?
Yeah, that's often people's position. Would you please fix her?
Yes.
She is broken, and maybe you as a Mormon woman can enlighten her about how to claim her sexuality. And
Wow.
there is
Okay.
some legitimacy to that
Sure.
design on his part, but oftentimes what it masks or isn't exposed yet within their own minds is their own participation in and role in the sexual dysfunction.
Okay. So how do you address that? I mean, I love that you're getting here, because one of the things I hope to get to is this view that I get where I have a man coming in and letting me know in front of her that, hey man, I came into counseling, male therapist. Now tell her that if we just had more sex, I'm a better husband, father, employee, church servant, all of those
Yeah.
things.
Which is
Right?
a very typical script, which is
Absolutely.
basically do your duty and then I'll be a nicer guy.
Right. And so then that's the part where now I almost feel like it's okay. I'll let him get through the speech and that sort of thing. And then it's okay, to the wife and what's going on with you right now. And then she feels like, hey, yeah, it's all on me. Right. So if he is
Yeah, it's
not,
all on her.
yeah,
And he's also setting up the marriage dynamic to be about mercy sex as opposed to intimate sex.
I love it. Yes. Okay.
Right. So
Yeah.
he's setting up the very thing that he then complains about, which is she just does it mechanically. She just does it because, she feels like she should, but where's all the passion? But when you set it up that sex is a drive or a need, and you, woman, if you're a good woman, well, give it to me.
Yeah.
You've now set up the thing that you then makes you miserable because you never feel wanted.
Absolutely. Okay. And I apologize. I know this probably isn't the typical interview, but I work so much with that male component.
Yeah.
And so, at that point, then I kind of try to introduce the concept of, objectification, or at that point she feels like an object.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and that's, yeah, like you say, that script is that if we only had more sex,
Yes.
and then I always feel like then the guy turns into if I am angry enough, or if I am, I don't know, almost sad enough or down enough, then I will maybe get sex.
Yeah.
And, now fast forward later on in couples therapy, where that's not the person that she, says that's the guy I want to be intimate with, is the
No,
guy that has
definitely
to,
not.
right, pity and guilt my way into it. And
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Very undesirable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then he's scratching his head about why doesn't she desire me?
Oh, okay.
Right.
And all right, you fix it. All right. What do you do with that, Jennifer?
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess what I would say is there's often at least two, maybe three things going on there. First of all, it's often a co-construction. It's not just the man is pressuring this idea that if you take care of my sexual needs, I'll be a much nicer guy. And it's also that women, first of all, it's a cultural artifact. And so women have bought into this frame too. And when women who can often have a lot of anxiety about their sexuality, given the way that we shame sexuality culturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make it a difficult thing for women not to integrate, men as well, but in a different way. And so it's often a way for women to not develop themselves as people and as sexual beings, is to use the same frame that they're being handed, which is do me a favor and have sex with me.
Okay.
And so it's a way of not being intimate. It's a way of not being as exposed if you're just taking care of your husband, being that virtuous, self-sacrificing wife by putting up with his hedonism,
Yeah. Until
so
finally,
so it's a way for the woman to also hide. It's a way for men and women to hide, which is just take care of me this way. She will give him the mercy sex, but no one really is showing up. It's not very intimate on either side.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times both parties in a marriage want lower exposure marriages. They want lower exposure sex. And so couples are good at having sex without being very intimate.
Yeah.
Exposed. And this is a way to do it. I know that you asked me the question, and I said there's three things, and now I can't remember what the question was.
I can't either. So we're on the same page. It's fantastic.
Okay, good.
No, because and so then I love that, because that is the dynamic I see as well. And so I feel like so now here I'll lay out, I have three thoughts, and I bet I'll only get to one as well. Right. So my first thought was that it's that what I like to do is then if the woman felt like that wasn't all he cared about, I mean, because I get this concept, or maybe I wonder if you see this, where she doesn't want to hug him close. She doesn't want to kiss him. She doesn't want to lay in his lap while they're watching a movie, because then he's sizing up the moment to say, okay, looks like I got a good shot tonight. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, and I find that then at some point, then couples just I had a woman say that she won't even look at her husband when they're at the dinner table because
Mhm.
she
I
feels
don't
like
want to give many ideas.
yeah, exactly. So, and then, oh, I do remember my second one. So do you feel like this concept of intimacy then is when you're trying to kind of sell that to your clients, do you feel at times that they don't even know what that looks like? We're trying to sell this idea that they don't even, they're like, okay, sure, fine, but just tell her to have more sex with me. I mean, that's,
Well, I think people often don't know what it looks like, but they do know what I mean when I'm talking about hiding and avoidance.
yeah, okay.
Okay, so it's like maybe they haven't thought about it, but people do know how to manage how much of themselves they show to another
Mm,
person. And they can usually see that they are masking or managing what of themselves shows up in their
okay.
relationship, whether that's at the dinner table or in bed. So I think that, yeah, people are good at keeping relationships at the level that they know how to handle the level of exposure, even though they have maybe never experienced what it is to really have an open-hearted, more intimate marriage.
Okay. And so I want to kind of go back even to, well, okay, I do have to interject one more quick question too. I know on your website, you work on, I mean, you work with spirituality, women's issues, parenting, depression, couples issues. Do you feel what's the percentage of your work that is around sexual issues? I mean, is that the bulk of it?
It is. I mean, I put all that on my website kind of when I first started,
Yeah, okay.
And I
Yeah.
mean, I do deal with all those issues. It's absolutely no question. I
Yeah.
would say, relationship issues and sexuality issues is really primarily what my focus is,
Okay.
but it touches on all those things.
Sure.
I
Okay.
mean, going back to, I think the question you asked me earlier, when that couple comes in and
Yeah.
he's complaining about that. I mean, what my strategy is often is to basically understand why she doesn't desire. I'm going to do it in the stereotypical way right now,
Okay.
which is the
Sure.
low desire woman and the higher desire man. And so why does she not desire him? And oftentimes there's two broad categories to think about. One is the issue of her self and sexual development.
Yeah.
Okay, that's also true for the men. I just specialize a lot in working with Mormon women and their own relationship to desire, to sexuality, to self-development, because I think culturally we are pretty compromising of women in
Mm.
this way. And so that's often a factor, is that women, in their effort to be good women, desirable women, have sort of suppressed a fundamental part of being a woman and a
Okay.
fundamental part of being human. So that's sometimes a factor. You have people that are sexually immature, and it sounds insulting when I say it that way, but I mean it in a literal developmental sense,
Sure.
that there
Yeah.
isn't a deep integration of their sexuality that's happened yet. So that's often a piece that's going on. And then there is the issue of what's going on in the relationship. Now, some people who haven't developed themselves sexually very much and don't want to,
Yeah.
they can do things in the relationship to basically shame his sexuality, to basically never offer him desire, to never really validate who he is as a person, as a way of keeping control, keeping him coming towards her for validation, and
Mm.
her having a sense of control in the marriage, so she doesn't have to really develop who she is.
Sure. Oh, do you feel like that's typically subconscious, not something that she's even aware she's doing?
Well, I hesitate to use the word subconscious because it's not just happening to you.
Yeah.
Okay. It's purposeful action, but that's very different than saying it's premeditated.
Sure.
You
Okay.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's purposeful. You know how to do it. For example, in one case, like, she's doing what her mother did. Her mother would never offer her dad acceptance, love, physical validation. The mother ran the family
Yeah.
out of her kind of contempt and judgment.
Okay.
And then the daughter, who's now an adult, has done the same thing in the marriage.
Okay.
So the husband's always sort of feeling that he's ostracized, that he can't ever get her approval or acceptance, but she gives enough to kind of keep him tethered to her.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's one version of it. In other cases, there's the man who is like, you owe it to me. I'm the man. I
Mm.
do everything. What's your problem?
Yeah.
And so she will kind of manage him through being sexual, trying to keep his criticism and his anger and aggression at bay.
Okay.
But it's not about desire. It's about manage. So she may even be sexual quite a bit, but that's very different than she's really someone who is integrated with her sexuality and is really expressing love to him through her body.
Okay.
Very different. So
Well,
I'm usually looking at both the level of sexual development in both people
okay.
and how integrated they are with their sexuality. And then I'm looking at what is the dynamic of this marriage and what is happening that sexual desire is not likely here.
Okay. And I do want to tap into what your expertise is. So in that moment, do you continue doing couples work, or is that where you need to kind of step back and explore with the woman, her relationship with sexuality?
I usually just keep doing couples work, even if she's working on some of these things, you know, within the context of couples work. Sometimes I'll do individual sessions, and oftentimes I'll have people do my online course for LDS
Okay.
women, right?
Yeah. And I've heard a
Yes.
lot about that.
The Art of Desire.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that really, but so much of the work of sexual development, which is also in this course, is around your relationship to your own sense of self, your relationship to desire in your life generally, your development as a person who is capable of really loving and being loved, is capable of really knowing and being known.
Okay.
And how your development of sexuality is integral to that process of becoming a whole woman, a whole person.
Yeah.
So it is teaching women about women's sexuality, which is an amazing, women's sexuality is amazing, really. I mean, I think our culture does it short shrift in a crazy way, because
Yeah.
we reference male sexuality to understand female sexuality. And so
Uh,
female sexuality looks broken by comparison because it's different than men's sexuality. But so part of the course is helping women, and part of the work I do with women is helping them understand what women's sexuality is really about. But the course is not so much about helping women become sexually competent so that they can, help their poor
right.
husband,
Yeah.
right? It's really about how to be more integrated with yourself, to be more of a whole, solid human being who can be a force for good in your life, in your marriage, with your children, in whatever capacity. And that is fundamental aspect of that is being integrated with your desires and your sexual nature.
So where do you mind kind of stepping back and then take
Sure.
the LDS woman, and maybe from the time, can you kind of work that through linear from the time they are young? This is the story we hear. And so here's where, is it the shame or the guilt that kind of drives the narrative? And then all of a sudden now we're married and hey, there you go, and then, so yeah.
Yes. I think for both LDS men and women, there is a narrative that sex is Satan's pathway and that sex will take you down. And so there's a deep anxiety, and this is not just specific to Mormonism. I mean,
Okay.
it's cultural anxiety around sexuality for a good reason, which is because sexuality is a very intimate and powerful way to be in connection with other people.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the way that anxiety around sexuality gets handled, and particularly because in our faith we have a fairly restrictive set of norms around how we should handle our sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes how we teach that, given that we have high expectations around sexual behavior, is to frighten people around their sexuality.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
It's this fear-based teaching rather than goal-based teaching. And so when you're fear-based, then there is this anxiety that sex will take you down. Sex will turn you into a bad person. Sex will distance you from God and from the people that you love. And what we do, we teach men and women, both men and women get taught that idea. But I think the difference between men and women is that we teach women that sex is something, men are naturally sexual, women are not.
That's what we teach, or that's the narrative.
That's
Okay.
the narrative. That's the message within the message, is that women are sexual only to accommodate and manage the sexuality and sexual nature of men.
Okay.
So men are naturally sexual. And so women should therefore, dress modestly, cover their bodies up, because men's sexuality is present and normal for being a man. But if you tempt them, that not only is it dangerous for you, it's dangerous for them.
Yeah.
So they're implicit in that idea is that sex is something you give a man. Virginity is something you give a man, but men are the sexual actors.
Okay.
Women are in response to this. So many Mormon women that I work with, what they do is because they see sexuality as something that makes you bad, and particularly so for women. For example, many of the women
Uh-oh. My first ever frozen podcast. I'm going to hang on here for a second, and hopefully Jennifer will come right back. This is a first on the virtual couch. If she doesn't bounce back, I will pause the video. Let me pause that right now. Okay, we're back. Go, can you hear me? Oh.
There, sorry about that.
Okay.
I lost internet. That was my problem.
No problem. The kids were playing Fortnite. Is that what it was?
No, no. My husband thought I was on the big computer, and so he did something with the Wi-Fi network, not knowing that I was on my laptop.
Oh,
so anyway.
Okay. I'm so glad you're back. No, that was okay. Good. All right.
Do you remember what I was just saying?
You were about to solve everyone's problems around sexuality in the entire world. You were about to give the secret.
Exactly.
No, so it was kind of talking about that where women are. You were talking about how they give the sexuality, they give their virginity. Yeah.
That's right. So I think what I was saying was, I'll just start. So I think, for example, women in my research felt more guilty if they had engaged in some, behavior premaritally, than, meaning they thought it was more acceptable if a man had done the same thing. And so that is the idea that women are worse if they are sexual. So what many women in my research and in my office clinically have done is they just shut this whole enterprise down. Like, if this is going to make me undesirable, which is an idea that we teach, and if this is going to make Satan have some grip on me, I just won't develop this at all. I'll wait till I get married, and then my husband will awaken this whole part of me.
Okay.
And he will teach me about how to be sexual, because men are naturally sexual. And so what happens, of course, is people get married, and then they're waiting in a sort of passive stance for something to be awoken within them. And it never works that way.
Right. Okay. So what's your advice? I mean, and it is funny, the one I was telling she wants to be the next you. The student that was emailing me this morning wants to be a LDS female sex therapist, which I love that. And so, she talked about, or the question was around, how do LDS women prepare for their sexual lives in marriage? And she said, because I have so many friends that have gotten married, struggled in their sex lives because they either felt bad about having sex or they didn't know their body as well. So, yes.
So I think we have to really reconsider how we teach young men and young women in the church, or even at an earlier age, how we teach our children about sexuality. Because if we do it in the frame that sex is inherently dangerous and bad, you're going to have all the problems you see in adulthood in the church now, which is issues with pornography and issues with sexual repression.
Okay.
Because what we need to do is to talk to boys and girls and men and women about sex as though sexuality is a fundamental part of being human. It's God-given.
Yeah.
That our parents in heaven are embodied just as we are, and that sexuality is not good or bad. It just is. It's just fundamental to being embodied. What you do with your sexuality will determine whether or not sex is good or bad. Okay. What you do with your sexuality matters, because what your choices make a difference. They impact both you and they impact others, whether those are choices of indulgent behavior or repressive behavior.
Okay.
Right? Repressing your sexuality is bad for your psychological and sexual and spiritual development, in my opinion.
Because that leads
pure
to
repression is.
Okay.
Pure repression is because you're basically suppressing a fundamental part of being embodied. And we in our faith believe that embodiment is fundamental to our spiritual development.
Yeah.
If you're really going to love and be loved deeply in marriage, which is the gift of marriage, right?
Yes.
You have to be able to really be integrated with your body. Meaning to love and be loved, and to be able to love through your whole body. That's probably like the most wonderful part of life. is to be fully accepted by someone and to be fully accepting of them. But if you can't really be at peace with your whole body, your sexuality included, you cannot know that kind of peace both with yourself or with another person.
Mm.
And so we are teaching sexuality in a way that makes it impossible to be at peace. Because we teach men also that sexuality is fundamental to being male or masculine, but that it's dangerous. That it's something that will take you down, and it's a privilege on some level. It's a privilege of marriage. We teach men that idea. So that's why you get a lot of entitlement in men once they get married. But also it's something that you do to a woman.
Okay.
Right? It's not something that you really share. That it's about how can we be together and be sexual and enjoy each other. And so when you have it in the frame of it's something you do to another person, well, it fosters either entitlement, or in men, it can foster a sense of anxiety, because at least more sensitive men don't want to be inflicting their sexuality onto their spouse all the time.
Sure.
And so a lot of times it creates more anxiety and fear around sexuality for many men.
So when you talk about we need to do a better job younger in teaching that, what does that look like?
Well, I think you need to, first of all, you have to deal with your anxieties about sexuality as a person and as a parent, because your anxieties, your kids will track them and pick up on them whether or not you want them to.
Sure.
And so it's going to include doing some work around the false traditions or messages that you've internalized around sexuality. But I think what it is a basic embracing and celebration of the body from a very young age, so that you're not, afraid of your child's nudity.
Yeah.
You're not showing
so there's not
anxiety.
that shame, or I can't believe you're, go get something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of times kids are going to touch themselves when they're very young and be exploring their bodies. This is 100% normal.
Yeah.
Because your child is just trying to understand where they end and the world begins. They want to kind of know who they are. And of course, areas of their body that give them pleasure are going to be interesting to them. And that does not mean they're soon to be a pervert. It just means they're human.
Okay.
So to be very normalizing of this is very important, because you're giving your child a message that the body is good. And
I like your concept too around dealing with our own issues. I mean, because I went and spoke to a school recently of how to talk to your kids about sex. And I felt like there were a lot of people there that were just so, you could see the anxiety and nervousness on their face. And it was like, okay, we're coming here. We got to get like serious and angry and battle ready. And right.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Exactly. So I think absolutely. We have a hard time seeing our children as sexual beings or accepting that they are, if we want to control them, if we're afraid of what they might do with their sexuality. And so many of us almost instinctively want to shame it out of them. Yeah. But I promise you will create many more troubles for them and you if you do that to your children. Because when it's put in a frame of shame, you inhibit your child from being able to integrate this with their sense of self and be able to make clear-headed choices with their sexuality.
Okay.
For example, the more women were shamed, there's some research on and the less educated they were about their sexuality as adolescents, the more likely they were to have sex. And not good sex, right? Sex where they felt exploited, sex where they felt, taken off guard, sex where they were more likely to get pregnant, because they had no opportunity to kind of integrate it enough with their sense of self to be able to proactively make decisions.
So, and I think that is the biggest takeaway is so the more it is shamed, the more it's repressed, the more guilt that is around it, then the more active that someone is, or they have an unhealthy relationship with sex.
Yeah, the more unhealthy their relationship to sexuality is, whether it's through indulgence, if you want to use that word, or through repression.
Okay.
So it's like it's a little bit like, and sometimes I use a food metaphor, which is if you basically, the desire to have food is normal. Yeah. The desire to have sugar is even normal, because from a survival perspective, sugar is the surefire way for the body to get the calories it needs to stay alive.
Quick energy, right? Okay.
Right. But if you tell people that, if you tell someone that eating sugar is bad, even wanting it is bad, if you want brownies, it means you're bad. What you are going to do is either create an anorexic or a bulimic. You're going to either create someone who just says, I will not let myself have any pleasure. Okay. Or you're going to have someone who's trying to not want it, but become obsessed with it because it's not allowed. And so they will be excessive. Either position is bad for the psychological and, physical development of a human being in the food metaphor.
So first of all, I love brownies, but then you also were going to that's what I loved in one of the podcasts. You talked about the candy store analogy. I mean, with regard to pornography and sexuality, do you mind sharing that?
Sure. And I don't know if I exactly remember how I talked about
That's
that,
okay.
but I think the idea is basically it's normal for adolescents to be drawn to be curious about sexuality, to be curious about nudity.
Mm.
I sometimes tell the story like my dad had a book on his top of his bookshelf called The Naked Communist.
Oh, wow.
And The Naked Communist is a Leon Skousen book. It's like a political philosophy book.
Yes. Had nothing about nudity. Yeah.
But I scaled my father's bookshelf to get that book and was disappointed to see there were no naked communists in it. Okay. That's normal behavior. I mean,
Yes.
You're curious, you're trying to understand sexuality. So if you shame that, okay, if you say that the fact that you have sexual feelings or you're curious or you want to see a naked woman or whatever, that there's something wrong with you, first of all, you're being dishonest with your child.
Yeah.
And you're shaming something that's normal and necessary for becoming capable of sexual intimacy in an integrated way down the road.
Yeah.
So you want to normalize it, because, and I think the candy store metaphor I used is, like porn is everywhere. Okay. It's just pornographic images are everywhere. It's the culture that we live in. If you make it forbidden, you increase its desirability.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I can't remember how I referenced the candy store exactly, but I think what I'm saying is the same idea, that if you basically say you can't have it, you're going to forge an obsession with eating candy.
Yes.
I had a friend who would throw herself in front of the magazine racks in the grocery store line so that her kids, who were 3 and 5, would not see the bare, or the low cut dresses and the bikinis and so on of the women in the magazines. And because she was so terrified of her kids becoming porn addicts.
Yeah.
And I said to her, you are turning them into porn addicts, because you are meshing both fear and the forbidden together.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so it's like this anxiety and then this curiosity, and what is mom so afraid of? It like drives a kind of obsessiveness, rather than, yeah, it's normal. People sell stuff. If they try to sell stuff by showing more of their bodies, like, isn't that silly? Okay.
And yes.
And just kind of allow your kids to make sense of it. Allow them to see that you're not terrified of it, that you yourself are comfortable with a better version of sexuality than that kind of objectifying or commodifying of sexuality. Yeah. And so, you're role modeling a kind of moderation and clarity that is really needed to navigate through a very sexualized world.
And then one of my big soapboxes, and I love you tied in there, is I say that parents always say, you can come and talk to me about anything, but then if you come and say, hey, how about that sex? And then they're like, we don't talk about that, and so now now the teen or the youth they know now I need to control the flow of information.
Yes, definitely.
Right. And so
kids are always tracking, can my parent really handle this conversation?
Yeah. So I want that conversation about, hey, so and I remember when we had the talk with our kids, my oldest, after, when proudest dad moment is she circles back around at a store a few days after we had the talk. And then, she sees the magazine, and there's a teenage girl, and she's some star, and she's pregnant. And my daughter saying, she's like, before I thought, I don't understand. She's not married, and she's pregnant. How does that work? And I just love the fact that then we talked about it then.
Right.
Before, I don't want that, she's trying to figure out the world, and she's like, I can't ask mom or dad because they flip,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And when they see that you can really handle it, and that you know things, they will use you as a resource. They really will. And then there is also a certain point, my 15-year-old, I was talking to my husband in front of my 15-year-old the other day, and I was saying something like, someone wrote an email and they were asking, how do you talk to your kids about masturbation? And my 15-year-old was there and he's like, you don't.
Okay.
It's kind of funny. I mean, there's a certain point at which they no longer want you talking to them. And so, the prime age to really download information and your values and so on is about age 8 to about age 12.
Perfect. Okay.
And, it's not that you can't still
Right.
mentor or talk about or be aware, but they're less open as they get older.
I love that. This was going to be my last question, but I've got another one that I want to ask after this one. But I was going to say, with the 3 kids, as a therapist myself, and we all share a Kindle Cloud, and I think they see all the, pornography addiction, recovery, that sort of thing. And so any family night, I almost feel like they're all ready to say, are we talking pornography again tonight? Like, no, we're okay. But since you mention it, then it's like, what have you seen? What's the last thing you saw? So I don't know if this one's going to be too ambiguous of a question, but so what I do see a lot, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are, when there are some women who it was never talked about when in their home, and it was probably heavily guilted and shamed. And so then they get in a marriage, and it's, so the husband, I work with a lot of men, and sometimes it is because now they turn to addiction, they turn to pornography as a coping mechanism or whatever, that sort of thing. But it's because they feel like their wife just has zero interest in sexuality, and to the point where she doesn't even want to talk about it. Right. And so do you have some thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that can be true, that people who have a lot of it, and I would say both the man and the woman in this example have anxiety about sexuality. It's
Absolutely.
just getting handled in different ways.
Yeah.
And what advice? I guess what I would say is that, I mean, one of my big messages is trying to just normalize. I don't even normalize is quite the right word.
Just even talk about it, I wonder.
Exactly. Sexuality is so fundamental to being human, and so fundamental to having a good marriage. Mm-hmm. The thing that's different about marriage than any other relationship is it's both chosen and that it is a sexual contract. And that's not me saying you have to have sex with your spouse. I'm saying that the understanding, unless there's some explicit other agreement, is that when you get married, that there's this idea that we are bringing our sexuality to one another. Uh-huh. And then what happens is, because this is higher anxiety, or there's things that are not working, or there's things that are being exposed through the sexual relationship or the lack of it, that is overwhelming for the couple, that oftentimes they will handle it by not handling it. Yeah. They will just try to distance from it. And so, and then what often can happen for the man in this particular kind of scenario is that he feels like, if I bring it up, she gets really upset. She gets really distressed. I just better stop bringing it up. And she maybe thinks, well, he's not bringing it up, so maybe we're good.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. Or he brings it up and she says, this is all you ever think about.
Yes.
Why are you such a natural man?
Yeah.
And as opposed to, really being willing to address and deal with how corrosive it is in the marriage that the sexual relationship is not really being dealt with. Sometimes it's about the woman's repression, but sometimes she's also getting really bad sex. I mean, sure. She doesn't necessarily understand enough what she wants to know how to ask for better sex. Sometimes she does know what she wants, but her husband is not that interested in learning about her or knowing or willing to really give her what she wants. Many couples kind of co-construct the sexually broken woman because the man prefers that idea.
Yeah.
In a sense, I know it sounds strange, but he prefers that you're broken and you just sort of accommodate me, than that she could really access her sexual capacity and interest, right?
Yeah.
So, for people to really address why does sex not work for us? I asked somebody today, why do you think your wife doesn't desire you? How do you make sense of that? And, I had been giving him lots of data about how he's not trustworthy, how he does self-serve so much in the marriage, how he basically mind twists her around things. Okay. He's sort of acknowledging I'm right about that, but doesn't really want to acknowledge the one. I said, how do you make sense of it? he spent all of his energy talking about how she's broken, not about how he functions like somebody that a woman with good judgment would not desire.
Okay.
Right. So it's often very hard. We want to just say, what's the matter with you that you don't want me, you loser?
Yeah.
Rather than, how do I make it hard for someone to want to really be close to me, open up to me, bare her soul to me? A lot of times we don't want to deal with who we really are.
Okay. I love that. I mean, because and you do a lot of couples work. I do an awful lot of couples work, and that really does boil down to that empathy and awareness and understanding. And I need to take my fixing and judgment hat off, and I need to understand where my partner's coming from. And that's more important to me than, can't we just have more sex?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And kind of, because what's often happening in couples is the meanings that are happening around their marriage and their sexual relationship is what's killing desire. He doesn't even notice if I'm here. Meaning, okay, maybe I don't want to touch him or hug him because then he'll take it as a signal that I want to have sex. But what she's also saying is, I don't want to touch him and hug him because he will bulldoze then. He doesn't track, or he refuses, he does track, but he refuses to acknowledge that I'm not continuing to give signals that I want it. So he takes it as like, okay, I've gotten the bit of data that I can now justify myself.
Now we're on, right?
Now we're on, I can justify myself. And she knows he doesn't even care that I'm not here.
Right. Okay. And we want that. That's not being present. That's like, okay.
Yeah. And then maybe a little bit darker version of it is, it's that I don't care if you're here. I feel entitled to sex and I'm going to have it with you. And I can use the fact that you made eyes at me at dinner to justify moving forward, or going blind to the fact that you are not present and don't want it.
Yeah. Right? Wow. Okay. Hey, any other kind of final thoughts? I mean, there's a couple other, I feel like I got a couple other deep dive topics. Maybe I could touch base with you again down the road.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I have other thoughts other than, I think what I maybe would say is that working out what's not working in your sexual relationship is fundamental to developing as people and to developing into people more capable of love and spirituality. Yeah. So one of the things that's really amazing about our theology is that we really do believe that the body is fundamental to our spiritual development. But then around sex, we sort of forget that idea.
Yeah.
Rather than really confronting who you are as a person, who you are in your own development, who you are in your relationship, is really fundamental to becoming someone more capable of really loving and caring for another person and being cared for.
And I like what you said earlier, if you can't tap into that, then how do we expect to have this ultimately connected marriage and relationship and a different view of intimacy and living happily ever after, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what are the courses that you recommend? You have some nice online programs, I think, that would be great.
Sure. So I have the one I referenced, The Art of Desire, which is a course for women's self and sexual development, LDS women's self and sexual development. Then I have 2 couples courses. One is called Strengthening Your Relationship, which really helps you look at the dynamics of your relationship, what's happening, and how you can develop skills and capacities to forge a better relationship. And then I have a couples sexual intimacy course. It's called Enhancing Sexual Intimacy. And I really help people to understand the way I think about sexuality, the way I think about sexual development, and then what's happening in this partnership that sexual desire breaks down or sexual connection breaks down, and how you can create something deeper, more meaningful, and more inclusive of the female, because many of us are trying to operate under a very male model.
Yeah.
And then I do a How to Talk to Your LDS Kids About Sex course.
I love that. I wasn't aware of that when I was looking on your website. That's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really trying to help parents teach their children sexual integrity. And by that, an integration of their body, but also an integration with their morality and what it is they want to create through their sexuality and through sexual decision-making. That is to say, what you don't do is as much as important as what you do choose around your sexuality, to forge the kind of ability to be in an intimate relationship down the road.
Okay. Hey, I really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah, this was fantastic. So hopefully we can catch up again down the road. And your website is?
Just my name, Finlayson-Fife.com, hyphen in between. So Finlayson-Fife.com.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
And I will put links in the show notes. And Jennifer, I'm really grateful for your time. I am.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
yeah, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk again.
Okay, good. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. No, thank you so much.